Welcome to today's deep dive. You guys sent over a really interesting mix of sources this time around.
Yeah.
It's all about gambling and
Hmm.
specifically gambling addiction. We've got everything from casino ads
Interesting.
to global support groups. I mean, it's a pretty wide range. So
Yeah.
where do we even begin?
Well, you've already hit on something really fascinating just by laying out those sources. I mean, you've got this casino ad on one hand.
Yeah.
It's all flashy and promising free games and big wins.
Right.
But then you've got these articles detailing the very real and often really devastating consequences of gambling addiction.
Yeah, it's like these two sides of the same coin.
Absolutely.
And I guess we're about to flip and see what lands face up.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so before we get too deep into it, let's just define our terms here.
Sure.
What exactly is gambling addiction?
Well, clinically, it's actually referred to as gambling disorder,
Okay.
and it's classified as an impulse control disorder.
Hmm.
So basically what this means is that a person feels this overwhelming urge to gamble.
A compulsion? They just can't resist, even though they know. Even though they know it's leading to all these negative consequences in their life.
And we're not just talking about like losing some money here and there.
No, not at all. The impact goes way beyond finances. We're talking about relationships, careers, their mental health. It really affects the whole picture.
This makes me think about a guy I knew back in college.
Oh, yeah.
He was always scrambling for cash,
Yeah.
always borrowing money from anyone he could.
Mm-hmm.
His grades totally tanked, and he just always seemed so on edge.
Wow.
It wasn't until much later that I realized he was actually struggling with a gambling problem.
That's tough.
It was a real eye-opener for me.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It just showed me how this addiction can really seep into every single corner of a person's life.
Absolutely. It's a perfect example of how this disorder, you know how it actually plays out in the real world?
Yeah.
It's not just a clinical term. It's people's lives we're talking about.
Right.
And oftentimes it follows a very particular pattern.
You mean like a downward spiral? Yeah, exactly. It often starts subtly. Maybe they start increasing their bets, trying to chase those losses, convinced that the next win, it'll make it all back.
Right, right.
But of course, that just leads to more financial strain,
Yeah.
which just creates more stress, and that spills over into their relationships, their work, everything. It's a vicious cycle.
Like getting caught in a whirlpool.
A whirlpool, exactly.
The harder you fight, the more you get sucked in.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, so what is it that actually brings someone to that point in the first place?
Right.
Is it just bad luck, or is there something more to it?
Well, it's not that simple. There's this whole interplay of different factors.
Okay.
Genetics can definitely play a role.
Yeah.
Some people are predisposed to addiction,
Mm-hmm.
their environment, social influences.
Mm-hmm.
Those matter a lot too.
Makes sense.
And then you've got the psychological components as well.
Speaking of psychology, one of the articles you sent mentioned this term skewed belief in luck.
Oh, yeah.
What does that even mean?
So basically, people with gambling addiction, they often have this distorted perception of probability and chance.
Okay.
They might think they have a system figured out,
Mm-hmm.
or that they can somehow control the outcome even when it's totally random, like flipping a coin.
Right.
So they overestimate their ability to, influence luck.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it even harder to actually see the problem and get help.
So they're kind of living in a different reality when it comes to odds and chances.
In a way, yeah. It's not just bad luck. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of how gambling actually works.
So how can someone recognize if they or someone they know might be heading down that path? Like, what are the warning signs to look out for?
Well, there are definitely some red flags, but it's important to remember that, addiction looks different in everyone.
Right.
But some of the common signs include preoccupation with gambling. So it consumes their thoughts. They're always planning the next bet or reliving past wins and losses.
Okay. And the article also mentioned increasing the size of those bets and having a hard time stopping or cutting back.
Exactly. Even when they know they should. And there are often emotional and psychological changes that come along with these behavioral signs,
Like what?
where you might notice increased restlessness, irritability, maybe even agitation when they're not gambling.
Wow.
The need to chase those losses, it can become all-consuming, driving them to do desperate things to get more money, sometimes even illegal activities.
That's intense. So it sounds like recognizing those early signs is critical for both the person themselves and for the people around them.
Absolutely. Early intervention can make a world of difference.
Now, one thing that really jumped out at me from this stack of sources you sent over was this list of support groups for gambling addiction. And it's from all over the world. It's a really extensive list. What do you make of that?
It really underscores how widespread this issue is. Gambling addiction It doesn't discriminate.
Right.
It affects people from all walks of life in every corner of the globe. And the fact that there are so many support organizations out there,
Yeah.
but it shows the scale of the problem.
Right.
But it also, thankfully, reflects the growing awareness and the resources that are available now to address it.
Yeah, I was actually surprised by some of the locations on this list. There are groups in the Philippines,
Really?
New Zealand, even a specific group just for Ontario, Canada.
Wow.
It's a real wake-up call.
Yeah.
This isn't someone else's problem happening somewhere else. It's happening everywhere.
It really is. But the good news is that there is help out there no matter where you are.
Exactly. And that brings us to the really important topic of treatment. And I think maybe we should dive into that in part 2.
Sounds good.
I'm particularly interested in exploring those treatment options in detail.
Okay.
What are the approaches that are actually effective? And then what about prevention?
Right.
Is there anything we can do to help people avoid falling into that trap of gambling addiction in the first place?
These are excellent questions, and ones we'll definitely dig into when we continue our deep dive.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. So for now, we'll leave our listener with this thought. Knowing the warning signs and understanding that support is out there, those are crucial first steps.
Absolutely.
But how can you use this knowledge to make smarter choices about gambling in the future? Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll tackle those questions and more.
Definitely. See you now.
Okay, so we're back and ready to dig into treatment and prevention. 2 really crucial pieces of the puzzle when it comes to gambling addiction.
Absolutely.
Let's start with treatment. What does that actually look like for someone struggling with this?
Well, treatment for gambling disorder, it's not one size fits all.
Right.
It's often tailored to the individual's specific needs. But there are some common approaches that have been proven effective.
Okay, like what?
One of the most well-known is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
I've heard of CBT, but how does it actually apply to gambling addiction?
So CBT helps people identify and change the thought patterns and behaviors that are contributing to their gambling. For example, they might learn to challenge those distorted beliefs about luck and control that we talked about earlier.
Right, like thinking they have some kind of system.
Exactly. So it's about rewiring their thinking, helping them see gambling in a more realistic light.
So kind of like giving them a reality check.
Yeah, exactly. And it also equips them with practical strategies to manage cravings, avoid triggers, and develop healthier ways to cope with stress.
So it's very hands-on, giving them tools they can actually use in their everyday life.
Exactly.
That's great. Are there other treatment options besides CBT?
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Sometimes medication might be used to address underlying mental health conditions that often go hand in hand with gambling addiction.
Like what kind of conditions?
Things like anxiety or depression.
Right. So it's not just treating the addiction in isolation. It's looking at the whole person.
Exactly. Treating any other factors that might be contributing to the problem.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you also mentioned motivational interviewing as a therapeutic technique. Can you explain a bit more about what that is?
Sure. Motivational interviewing, it's a more collaborative approach.
Okay.
So the therapist works with the individual to explore their own feelings about change. It's about helping them tap into their own desire to stop gambling rather than kind of forcing it on them.
It's almost like a process of self-discovery.
Yeah.
Empowering them to take charge of their own recovery.
Exactly. And it's especially effective for people who might be hesitant about seeking help in the first place.
Makes sense. So there's a whole range of approaches when it comes to treatment.
Yeah, definitely.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about prevention.
Okay.
Is there anything we can do to stop this problem before it even starts?
Absolutely. Prevention is key.
Right.
And one of the most important things is education and awareness. We need to give people the facts about the risks involved with gambling.
Right. Not just the fun stuff.
Yeah, not just the flashy, exciting side that we often see.
So shining a light on the reality of it.
Exactly. And being honest about the fact that the house always wins in the end. Gambling is designed to make money for casinos, not for the players.
Right. So managing those expectations.
Yeah, and that's where responsible gambling practices come into play.
Okay, tell me more about responsible gambling. What does that actually look like?
Well, it starts with setting limits.
Okay.
Limits on both the time and money you spend gambling.
Makes sense.
Think of it like any other form of entertainment. You wouldn't spend your whole paycheck on movie tickets, right?
Definitely not. So finding that balance.
Exactly. Recognizing when something that might start out as fun crosses the line into a problem.
And I guess also understanding that gambling shouldn't be a way to deal with stress or boredom or other negative emotions.
You got it. That's a huge trap that many people fall into.
Yeah. thinking a win will solve their problems when it usually just leads to more.
Right. Now, are there any practical tools or resources out there to help people stay on track?
Well, a lot of online gambling sites and even some casinos offer self-exclusion programs. So people can actually ban themselves from gambling for a certain period of time.
That's great.
And there are financial management tools that can help people track their spending and set limits.
So it's like having guardrails in place.
Exactly, to keep things from getting out of control.
Yeah. But of course, the most important tool is self-awareness. If you notice yourself gambling more often, chasing losses,
Right.
or any of those warning signs we talked about, it's crucial to reach out for help.
And remember, seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Absolutely. There are so many resources out there.
Like what?
Well, there are hotlines, support groups, therapy services. Don't be afraid to reach out. There are people who want to help.
It's encouraging to know there's a whole network of support ready to help people get their lives back on track.
Exactly. Recovery is possible. With the right support and treatment, people can overcome gambling addiction and rebuild their lives.
That's a powerful message.
And it's not just about the individual. It's about their loved ones, too.
Right, because addiction affects the whole family.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Support groups like Gam-Anon offer resources and guidance for family members.
Okay.
It's about healing and recovery for everyone involved.
Now, before we wrap up this part, I want to circle back to something you said about education and awareness being key to prevention. Even for someone who might never personally experience gambling addiction.
Right.
Why is it still important to have this knowledge?
Because even if you never struggle with it yourself,
Yeah.
this knowledge can make you a better friend, a more supportive family member, even just a more aware member of society.
So it's about creating a more understanding environment.
Exactly. If you recognize the warning signs in someone else,
Yeah.
you can be that person who encourages them to get help.
Right. Makes sense.
And on a broader level, understanding this issue allows us to have more informed conversations about things like responsible gambling policies and support systems.
Okay.
It's about building a society where help is readily available and the stigma surrounding addiction is reduced.
Powerful stuff. I think we've given our listeners a lot to chew on here.
I think so, too.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the nitty-gritty of treatment options to the big picture of prevention and societal impact.
We have. But there's one more point I really want to emphasize before we move on.
Okay, I'm all ears.
It's this. Recovery from gambling addiction is possible. I've seen it happen countless times. With the right support, individuals can reclaim their lives, rebuild relationships, and break free from this destructive disorder.
That's a really hopeful message.
It is, and it's important to never lose sight of that hope.
Well said.
Yeah.
All right, we've unpacked treatment and prevention pretty thoroughly.
Yeah.
Now, in our final part, I'm curious to hear your perspective on something. So you mentioned before the break, there's this other side to gambling addiction.
Yeah.
Something that people don't always think about.
Right.
What did you have in mind?
Well, it has to do with the whole psychology of gambling itself and how casinos, both online and those brick and mortar ones, they're designed to keep people playing, to keep them hooked.
So it's more than just those flashing lights and the exciting atmosphere.
Oh, yeah. Way more. I mean, think about the concept of near misses for a second.
Okay. Near misses.
Yeah, like when you're playing the slots and the symbols almost line up, or the roulette ball lands just one space away from your number.
Oh, I've totally felt that like rush of almost winning.
Exactly. And that's not an accident. Those near misses, they're actually calculated to trigger a release of dopamine in your brain.
Dopamine.
Yeah, that feel-good chemical.
Right. So it makes you feel good even though you didn't actually win.
Exactly. It creates this sense of anticipation. And it keeps you coming back for more even when you're losing.
Wow. So they're basically turning losses into almost wins.
In a way, yeah. It's like a psychological trick.
That's crazy. And it makes sense because I definitely feel that urge to keep playing after a near miss.
Right. And there's another cognitive bias that comes into play here.
Okay, what's that?
It's called the gambler's fallacy.
Gambler's fallacy. Okay, I've never heard of that.
So this is the belief that past events can influence future outcomes in these random games of chance.
So like what? Give me an example.
Sure. Let's say someone's flipping a coin and it lands on heads 5 times in a row.
Okay, yeah.
The gambler's fallacy would make them think that tails is like due to come up next.
Like the odds have to even out.
Exactly. But the thing is, each coin flip is a completely independent event.
Right.
There's always a 50-50 chance. Those previous flips don't change anything.
So it's like thinking the universe is keeping score or something?
Yeah, kind of. And casinos, They know about these biases.
Wow.
They design their games and environments to take advantage of them.
It's pretty eye-opening to think about all the psychology that goes into this.
Definitely. It's not just about luck. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes.
So, for our listener who's been with us for this whole deep dive, what's the main takeaway here? What do we want them to remember about gambling addiction?
I think the biggest thing is that knowledge is power. The more you understand about the psychology of gambling, the social factors, all the things that contribute to addiction,
Yeah.
the better equipped you are to make smart decisions and to protect yourself and the people you care about.
So, knowing the warning signs,
Yeah.
understanding the treatment options,
Absolutely.
even just being aware of those tactics that casinos use,
All of it. It helps you have a more empowered approach to gambling.
makes sense. And if someone is struggling, they should know that help is out there.
Absolutely. Reach out to a support group, talk to a therapist, confide in a trusted friend or family member. Recovery is definitely possible, and there's no shame in asking for help.
I love that. This has been such an insightful deep dive.
It has.
We've really gone beyond the surface and explored the complexities of gambling addiction, from the psychology of the games themselves to the support systems that are available.
It's been a pleasure sharing this with you and with our listener.
Likewise. Thanks for walking us through this important topic.
My pleasure.
And to our listener, we hope you continue learning about this issue. Whether it's educating yourself further, or maybe checking in on a loved one, or even just reflecting on your own relationship with gambling.
Right.
This knowledge can help you make positive changes in your life and the lives of the people around you.
And remember, even small steps can make a big difference.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive. Thanks for joining us.